stop messing up your lateral raise technique. I see far too many people mess up keeping their shoulders pebble-sized as opposed to boulder-shouldered. Welcome back, Dr. Milo Wolf with you today, PhD in sports science, breaking down the optimal technique for building bigger shoulders with lateral raises. Now you might ask, who am I to speak on this? Well, I've got a couple things on the average viewer. First, I can overhead press 2 plates, which by YouTube standards is all that really matters. How jacked are you and how strong are you? Second, I was actually one of the authors on the most recent review paper on training technique for maximizing muscle building. We looked at all of the evidence on different components of technique to establish what might be a good idea when it comes to maximizing how much muscle you build. What technique should you be using? Well, we identified 3 to 4 main components of good technique based on the available evidence. Here's what they are. First, tempo. With tempo, you can both go too fast, but also go too slow. On the too fast end of the spectrum, if your reps take much less than about a second or 2 per rep on average, you might be reducing hypertrophy. Specifically, if you have no eccentric control or no control whatsoever on the lowering phase, that may not be ideal for hypertrophy. No one's gonna hand you a trophy for lateral raising B100s with terrible tempo. Is it impressive? Yes. Does anyone care? No. So at the bottom end, taking at least a second or maybe 2 for most repetitions is a good idea. However, you can also go too slow. If you go much above 8 seconds per repetition, you start reducing how much hypertrophy you see as well. Now, this is relatively uncommon for lateral raises. Most people doing lateral raises tend to go way too fast more than anything, but it's worth keeping in mind that if your repetitions take more than about 8 seconds per rep, you may want to speed up. 8 seconds might not be a lot for certain things, but it is a lot when it comes to lifting. So anywhere between about 2 seconds to 8 seconds per repetition seems to be quite effective. Based on some more recent preliminary data, you may also want to have a slightly longer eccentric phase and a slightly more explosive concentric phase, or essentially control the lowering phase a bit more and be explosive on the lifting phase. Aiming for at least a 1 to 2 second eccentric and an explosive concentric is a great idea. Finally, when it comes to tempo, we can also modify it slightly to accentuate the length and position, something we'll come back to in just a moment. Another important aspect of technique we identified in our review paper is range of motion, and there's a few things we found. First, that peak contraction position doesn't seem to really contribute to hypertrophy very much overall. Instead, the stretched position of the movement appears the most important. And so when it comes to range of motion, we at the very least don't want to skimp on that stretched position. So at least use a full range of motion, or based on some more recent data, you could even try doing lengthened partials, or essentially half reps in the stretched position of a movement. There are 5 studies now comparing lengthened partials to a full range of motion, with 4 studies finding more hypertrophy from lengthened partials, and 1 finding no difference. Importantly, none of these studies were in the shoulders, and there are still some questions to be answered. But, assuming this is a generalizable principle, which it appears to be, there may be a point to trying some lengthened partials in your program for your shoulder training. If nothing else, it'll let you lift more weight and impress everyone. On the lateral raise, that means not going all the way up necessarily. While Dr. Mike Israetel of Renaissance Periodization has popularized the use of the super ROM lateral raise, where you go all the way up to over your head, I'm not sure I would recommend this. Instead, especially if you're going for lengthened partials, try coming up to only about 45 to 90 degrees. By doing this, you'll be focusing a bit more on the stretch position. While the dumbbell lateral raise might not be the most lengthened biased movement ever, and there are likely better exercises, I have a whole video on that here, there's a couple of ways we can accentuate that stretch position a bit more. First, as I mentioned earlier, as far as the tempo goes, try being explosive at the bottom of the rep. While the amount of force you need to produce to just get past the bottom position isn't very large, if you try to be explosive and accelerate the weight as much as possible, you'll be producing more tension in a relatively lengthened position. Second, if you don't want to do lengthened partials, you can try doing a lengthened superset. In a lengthened superset, you just do full range of motion repetitions until you can't get another full rep. And then, instead of ending the set, you extend the set just doing lengthened partials. We now have 1 study that is unpublished because we haven't finished writing it up yet, but as a viewer of Wolf Coaching, you get the early scoop, where in the calves, we compared just doing full range of motion reps to doing lengthened supersets. Or essentially, when you couldn't get another full rep, you would keep going with lengthened partials. In this study, comparing these 2 approaches of just doing full reps to doing lengthened supersets, we found 50% more hypertrophy in the calf muscle when doing lengthened supersets as opposed to a full range of motion. Importantly, the lateral raise is similar to the calf raise in that the hardest part of the movement is at the very top of the repetition when the muscle is shortened. There is good reason to believe that this would generalize to the shoulders as well. And so, as an alternative to lengthen partials as a way to emphasize the stretch, although this is only 1 study, you could do full reps on the lateral raise until you can't get another one, and then just do partials. that might be another way to accentuate the stretch position. The next important factor we identified in our review paper when it comes to technique is to minimize the momentum generated by other muscle groups, or essentially minimize body English. There's a few things at play here. One, by involving our lower body and bending over and swinging the weight up a little bit, we're involving muscle groups that aren't the ones we want to target. It's very unlikely you're going to get a great stimulus for your glutes, quads, hamstrings, and adductors in the lateral raise unless you're really doing something wrong. Similarly, it is reducing the chances that our side delts will be a limiting factor. Think about an isolation movement versus more of a compound movement. In an isolation movement, the odds that the target muscle is going to be the limiting factor and get an effective training stimulus in are higher, because there's fewer muscle groups involved. All of this to say that doing a power raise where you bend over and kind of just lift the weight up with the power of God, it's not going to help your shoulders grow. And in fact, it might even be reducing how much tension your shoulders have to produce in that bottom stretched position. By using your hips to start heaving the weight up, you're reducing that. Importantly, when it comes to minimizing the involvement of non-target muscle groups, some people tend to complain about the upper traps being involved in the lateral raise. That's because naturally the function of bringing your arm outwards is going to be accompanied by some degree of scapular elevation. And so you'll be training both your upper traps and your side delts. Fortunately, I don't think I've ever met anyone with upper traps too large, and I would take this more as a bonus than anything else. Plus, I'm skeptical of the idea that the upper traps are going to be close to the limiting factor when it comes to the lateral raise. With strict technique, most people can lateral raise a whole lot less than they can shrug. Obviously, the moment arms and the biomechanics are different, but you get the idea. The final component of good technique that I've more so come across in my own coaching experience is preference and pain management. Provided you've got a good range of motion, a good tempo, and you're minimizing the involvement of other muscle groups, you may find that there's a certain technique that you like a little bit more. For instance, some people like controlling the eccentric for 4 seconds versus for 2 seconds. Is this going to make a difference for hypertrophy? Probably not. But if you prefer one over the other, feel free to use it. Likewise, if a certain technique causes you pain during the lateral raise, there's a good chance you shouldn't be using it, and there's other options available. For instance, a common cue being given during the lateral raise is to turn your pinkies up and sort of internally rotate your shoulder. In my coaching experience, this causes some people some pain, so if it does for you, don't do it. Without further ado, here's how to do perfect technique lateral raises to maximize shoulder growth. First, grab a pair of dumbbells or whatever equipment you're using. Realistically, sitting down on this isn't a big deal, since you won't be loading this super heavily. So feel free to do these lateral raises standing or seated. Get the weight into position. To avoid using your hips or cheating the weight up, try squeezing your glutes if necessary. Likewise, keep your chest down the whole time. Don't puff it out and extend your spine to get the weight up. The cue of keeping your chest down can help accomplish this. For dumbbell lateral raises, you can either start with the dumbbells touching at the very bottom of the rep or with your arms straight down. With cables, machines, and lying dumbbell raises, definitely milk out that stretch position. Do not skip it. In fact, let your arm come across your body a little bit to even further increase the stretch. When you start the rep, be as explosive as possible out of that bottom stretched position. It's always a good idea, creating more tension in the stretch, but especially so with a dumbbell lateral raise. Lift the weight until about 45 to 90 degrees for partials or 90 to 180 degrees for full range of motion. There probably isn't any benefit in terms of hypertrophy to going above 90, but you can do so. Control the weight down, taking at least 2 or so seconds to perform the lowering phase. Optionally, pause briefly in the bottom position. It probably doesn't matter here because there is minimal tension in that bottom position, so it's entirely up to you. When you breathe during the lateral raise is mostly personal preference. Stabilization of the spine isn't a huge concern here, so intra-abdominal pressure isn't that big of a deal. I personally just breathe in and out freely during the whole rep, but you can certainly perform a Valsalva maneuver, breathing out during the eccentric, breathing in at the very bottom, bracing, and performing the concentric. Congratulations, you've performed a really solid technique on lateral raises. Let's quickly go through a checklist and make sure we've hit everything. First, as far as range of motion goes, we're making sure we get that bottom stretch position, which is better on certain exercises, but you get the idea. We're accentuating the stretch even a little bit further. We're not skimping on the stretch by using either lengthened partials or a full range of motion. We're not pausing at the top, emphasizing the shortened position. If anything, we're spending more time at the bottom part of the rep. If you wanted to increase the amount of tension in that bottom position, you could do something like a machine lateral raise. Alternatively, if you also want to get a deeper stretch in your side delts, you could do something like a cable or even a flat lying dumbbell side raise. As far as tempo goes, we have at least a 2-second eccentric. We're being explosive out of that stretched position, and our reps generally fall in the 2 to 8 second effective range. Finally, as far as minimizing involvement of other non-target muscle groups goes, we're doing a few things to minimize this. First, if you find you tend to swing the weight, squeeze your glutes during the repetition. Second, if you find you tend to extend your spine to get the weight up, try the cue of keeping your chest down during the whole rep and just moving your arms. So that is the optimal lateral raise technique when it comes to building muscle. Try this within your workout and you could be overpressing the mediocre amount of 225 pounds in no time. That's the video. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, subscribe, leave a comment letting me know what other exercises you want to see me break down. Now, wouldn't it be great if you had a training app that just broke down each exercise for you, telling you exactly how to do it to maximize muscle growth? It turns out that is a feature of a training app we've been working on for years now. Myself and other sports scientists have been working hard behind the scenes to bring this to you. The app is called Milo, and if you head to myoadapt.com, you'll be able to sign up to be notified when it gets released. It's due to be released within the next couple of months, so keep an eye out. This app will create an individualized training program for you, no matter how much time you have to train, whether you want to bring up certain muscle groups, and so forth. And we're continuously working to make it even better. Sign up to the email newsletter to get notified, and if you do sign up when it comes out, you'll be locked in at a lower price than you would otherwise ever get. It's cutting edge, there's constantly more science being incorporated into it. Because we changed the app as more evidence comes out on how to optimize your muscle growth, you'll always be at the cutting edge when it comes to optimizing your training. And you won't have to think about your training anymore, which is always welcome. For instance, since I've been using it, I found it tremendously enjoyable to just pull out my phone. Oh, it's a super effective session already planned out for me. And if I don't like something, I can just change the exercise. And better yet, the app tells you which exercises are best for muscle growth based on the evidence. So go check it out. I really recommend it. If you'd like me to coach you, check out the link above and I can become your coach. And now that I've sold my soul and that I've sold out and that I'm chilling for everything ever, finally, let me just mention, I hope you have a great day. And I'll see you guys, my subscribers, next time. Peace.